Friday, November 16th. Welcome to the Public Safety Committee special meeting. We've got two items this morning. We're going to go ahead and start with item one. I'm joined by my colleague, Councilman Dennis P. Zine. I know that Councilmember Joe Buscaino is on his way up, so we don't yet actually have a quorum. I do have a public comment card on item one, but we'll go ahead and have the staff report first, and if you can walk us through item one.
Item number one, City Attorney and Chief Legislative Analyst reports an ordinance relative to amending the Los Angeles Municipal Code to establish a valet parking operator permit program and related enforcement and implementation options.
Well, since we do have a quorum now, I've got one comment card. For those of you who'd like to fill out a comment card to speak on any agenda item, go ahead and do so now, please. And on the, for public comment, general public comment, before we take this item now, I'm going to hold that item for 1 second, open up general public comment. If there's any general public comment cards, we'll take those now. Are there any?
There are none.
Okay, we'll go ahead and close the general public comment period then and take item one. Good morning.
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 Marisa Zarantry with the CLA's office. We have a report before you on the implementation of the proposed valet program. We have CD13 here who instigated this whole effort back in 2009. If Marcel wanted to talk first, then I'll go into the report.
Sure. Good morning. Marcel Porras, Planning Deputy Council Member Eric Garcetti. This program actually initiated back in 2009 with concerns that arise out of our district, specifically in the Hollywood Central Business District, around public safety. The amount of nightlife that Hollywood benefits from had become a specific public safety challenge in areas where there was an over-concentration of nightlife venues and with patrons looking for parking solutions. And for as long as we've had valet parking in the city of Los Angeles, it has not been regulated. There is no specific valet permit that exists in the city, and through our public safety committee meeting, our public safety task force in Hollywood, we had learned that this was a serious issue for not only our patrons but also for our business owners who could were at their wits' end trying to figure out ways to provide good customer service that began at the curbside. So based on that, in 2009, we initiated a motion to begin looking at how to develop a valet permitting program for the city of Los Angeles. At that time, when we began the process, we realized that it was not just an issue in Hollywood, but in other pockets of the city as well. And parking, when looking at parking overall, parking was a much larger issue as well. And so there was a lot of discussions about parking management, public safety, et cetera. But so at one point, because of the size and grasp of trying to create a valet permitting process and all the different departments that would be involved, we then also started looking at potentially doing a pilot project in Hollywood specifically. I believe that was like in 2011, 2010, and that was unsuccessful because of the still need, if you're going to create a permitting system, you can't do it on a pilot basis. You have to do it on a citywide basis. So that's where we re-engaged to look at this as a citywide, and that's kind of where we're at today. And so I'll pass it over to Maria.
Okay. So after the initial motion went in, Marcel's outlined some of the issues that we prepared our first report in 2009 that talked about some of the options we would have, some of the issues we would need to address, and some of the other cities that had valet programs. So the recommendation in 2009 was for the city attorney to prepare an ordinance to establish a valet program. They released that ordinance about a year ago. Since that time, we have been meeting with the industry internally to work out some of the issues, to clarify what we're going to be doing. And then, so now we have before you the ordinance itself and then the CLA report that has some amendments to that to clarify, add, and make a few minor changes. So before I go through the recommendations to change the ordinance that's before you, I'd like to turn it over to Richard Tiefank of the Police Commission, because most of this is going to be under his purview in terms of the issuing of the valet permit. And then we have the Department of Transportation as well, who will also have an instrumental role And then after we talk about the program itself, I can come back with some of the amendments, if that's all right.
Good morning, members. Richard Tiefank, Executive Director of the Board of Police Commissioners. We see the permitting scheme for the valet service to be much like it is for auto parks. We would create a master permit program so a valet operator could have one master permit and then have sub-permits of that master for each individual location where they would do valet service at. The permitting scheme would allow us to regulate the industry to ensure that the operator is of good standing, passes the background test, has the appropriate insurance, is appropriately bonded and licensed, et cetera, to be able to operate that. As part of that also, that we envision creating a permit scheme for individual valets. The importance of that from our perspective is public safety, in that you give your keys to your car to a valet at the curb, you have no idea if that individual has had a arrest record for burglary, auto theft, et cetera, and will be taking control of your car. That permitting scheme on that individual valet, that valet would be permitted for a period of a year, and that valet then can move from valet company B to valet company C without having to get a new permit, because he or she is permitted as a valet. And then so that would not inhibit their ability to move with businesses or work multiple businesses, since this is generally a part-time work, a lot of college students involved in it, et cetera. So give them flexibility, we would be able to regulate, and we would establish through the Board of Police Commissioners, as we do for official police garages and a number of other permits that we have, board rules. And those board rules allow us to establish criteria that can be changed and modified from time to time as we see situations occur without having to come to council every time to change an ordinance. We have had very good success with that in our management of the official police garages. So, example of board rules would be that we would require a valet while operating in the street to wear the appropriate National Highway Transportation Safety vest, so there's reflection. If we're going to permit someone to be in the roadway, we need to make sure that they're safe and visible. We would require vests. We would require standardized shirts. We would require the display of the valet permit and those type of things, so the motoring public who give their keys to their car to a valet would know that this individual is permitted and the business is permitted. We would again work with the other city entities to create the standard size for the podium that the valet would operate at. Have a very visible city seal, very visible permit number, and displaying of the rates that are required to have for that valet service at that time. So it would give us the regulation to deal with those valets who do not comply with the city requirements, but also allow for some management where you have multiple locations on the same street with multiple valet operators. And that would give us some ability to regulate that, and working with DOT and the other city family members to develop a program where we can manage the overall where the vehicle is going to be parked, who's going to park the vehicles, and to ensure everyone is permitted. The permitting process, as far as a fee, we have not finalized that yet, but we envision it being similar to what is paid now for a master auto park permit. It would be the same type of paperwork requirement, and that fee currently is $329 is the first fee, and then the annual renewal fee is $155. For the individual valet, we estimate that fee to be about $100 and renewal about $50. That's the fee scheme that we see as far as cost recovery of the individuals involved in doing that through the police commission. So that at this point is general concept as we see the permitting scheme that would be created by the Board of Police Commissioners.
Great, thank you very much. I just would substitute the word scheme for system or process.
That's the word that the lawyers use all the time, is the
yes,
scheme.
I know. Anyway, the couple things on that. First of all, I've met and had several meetings on this with both you, Mr. Tiefank, as well as CD13 and others. And I think I asked every possible question that I could fathom, and a lot of input from outside organizations as well as chambers and restaurants, and took all of their questions and asked every possible question, and I was really blown away that you had not only just an answer, but you all had a great answer for every single question. We got into the details, for example, of, well, what happens if there's 5 restaurants on a block and then 3 of the restaurants have a valet company and there's not enough spaces in front of all 5 to park what cars are particularly needed for each restaurant, and then if that valet company has a contract, can they then hold those other restaurants that don't have the contract hostage? And we got into all kinds of scenarios. And there were actually, we came up with some great solutions where some things hadn't been thought of, and I really appreciate all the work that everybody put into this. It's incredible that we don't have a process now. It's incredible that we don't have, we have this sort of hodgepodge, sort of underground market, if you will, of valet parkers all over the city. And you're right, when you hand somebody your keys, you have no idea who these people are. They're not identified. They're not safe. They're driving cars on the public right-of-way. We don't even know if they're licensed. We don't know anything about them. Not to mention the fees they're charging and collecting those dollars as well. This is an industry that needs to have control mechanisms. It's not about government overreach. It's not about rules and regulations and taxing or creating revenue streams. It's about protecting the public. And you've really done a terrific job. The one issue I think we ran into, we didn't have a lot of answers for, and I believe it's taken off the ordinance now until it might come back separately, and I just wanted clarification on that, is the valet service for social gatherings. Seemed a lot more complicated. So,
Yeah, and there didn't seem to be quite the urgency and issues related to that, so that was in the original CLA recommendation or in the ordinance, we are recommending to take that out.
To take
and we
that out
will
for
deal
now.
with that in the future if
Yeah.
it becomes a problem.
and then so having said that, I just wanted to say thank you very much for all the work and effort you've done. I think this is well overdue, but it wasn't when it first proposed. There were so many questions out there, and working with so many people, particularly those heavy areas of Hollywood and other areas of the city that you see these everywhere on every block. Mr. Zine's district, along Ventura Boulevard, he and I went out on a sting operation not too long ago, and we saw these everywhere, and most of them weren't licensed. Most of them really didn't know how to solve for the issues of traffic impacts and ingress and egress, and they were parking on the aprons and running the cars idling, and there was no way to even try to go after some of these guys because we didn't have any rules. So I wanted to thank you very much. I absolutely support moving forward on this. I did some of my own research, and it's fascinating. I think I may be the only, I'm not sure with certainty, but I may be the only district in the entire city of LA that doesn't have a single facility or restaurant that has valet parking, unless they have a special event or some unique situation where they bring them in for one event, but on any type of regular basis. And so if there's anybody listening to this that wants to open up a decent restaurant with valet parking in CD12, we're open for business. But with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Zine if he's got any questions or statements on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You have some fine restaurants in your district, and you have a lot of free parking up there, too.
That's right, yes. And no parking meters in CD12, not one. So.
And no parking after 6 p.m., so that's a whole other story. The issue with the enforcement, and Mr. Engler and I did the enforcement with your officers, and it was quite an experience seeing that there's basically no regulation. They do what they want to do. So it's a welcome addition to the rules. The officers on the beat, your senior lead officers, your officers in black and white, how will they be informed of this process? Because DOT doesn't have the personnel of enforcement. You don't have the personnel. And if the police department is aware and officers recognize that as they're traveling down the roads, and they can do the enforcement to get compliance. So how is the connection going to be with the police department as far as enforcement?
What we will do is we will go out to each of the areas and attend roll calls. That's what we do now for official police garage enforcement and bandit tow operators. So our folks in Commission Investigation Division put together training plans. They will go out to the local areas, educate the patrol officers as to what they should look for when they see a valet, what the requirements of an individual valet would be, the podium placement, and that information. We'll be giving them all the ordinances. We'll give them some handouts so they'll have that information available to them. And we'll do that on a priority basis as to where the program rolls out first. So, example, let's assume this rolls out in Hollywood area first. Our focus would be Hollywood area. So as it rolls out, then we will go out and deal with those watches. particularly the evening and afternoon watches where the valet service will come into play. We'll also have, as we do for the official police garage, we give the areas a liaison number. They know to contact our D3, who is the head of our official police garage program. We would identify one of our D3s to be the supervisor of this program also. So if they had questions, they would have a contact 24/7, so they would be able to get some information and help us with enforcement. That's how we would roll it out. It's been very successful in the bandit tows for us and the OPG enforcement piece, and I think that's the model we would follow. And we also work with the department, put together training bulletins so it would be memorialized and moving forward.
Okay, because there's a ready resource of enforcement with those
Absolutely.
officers once they have the information.
Exactly.
I
What
think it's
about,
also,
Go ahead.
if I could also note that one of the amendments to the recommendations would be to include the Bureau of Street Services, street inspectors, so that they would have authority. They would not be the first ones to call, but they would have authority that they could cite on this as well, since they're out there citing on signs and street block, or sidewalk.
because unless we have enforcement, it's not going to have any impact, and that's the key.
Absolutely, and I think
So-
we're depending on self-reporting for other, if you see someone who's not licensed, it doesn't have the permit, that you would be calling that in, so.
And then there'll be a city seal on that podium, so people who drive down will recognize it. So it legitimizes the industry that has really been running as they wish for so many years.
Absolutely.
Will there be, the folks that park the cars, the valet parkers themselves, will there be some kind of identification, some type of check to make sure they have a license?
Yes.
Make sure they're qualified?
What we would do is, with them, is as we do with a tow operator applicant, they would come in, they would have to provide a live scan, so we would understand their background information about them. We would get the DMV information. We'd have all that information before we issue them the permit, and on an annual basis, that would be updated. That's part of the renewal fee cost. And also, there's a requirement upon the operator to provide to us who their valets are. So if I'm operating T-Fank's valet service, I have to provide Commission Investigation Division the listing of your valets that you are employing at the time, so we can ensure that they are all permitted.
And there'll be some, you mentioned the vest.
Yes.
I know that the department has it for the police officers directing traffic, DOT, so there'll be a vest that they will have on when they're operating.
Absolutely, and it'll have to say valet, and they'll also have to have their ID card visible.
So it's going to really bring it into some legitimate compliance.
Yes, sir.
I know in Hollywood, the times I've been there, they're all over the place. And you don't know if the guy taking your car is a car thief or actually a valet. There's no real identification of the individuals who are legitimately doing that. So it's great program. So that's good work.
Thank you. And are they still going to have the visible sticker as well? I know there was discussion about having some type of visible sticker on their podium or...
City seal.
Have any-
Yeah, it would be a city seal along with the official permitted valet service, and then the permit number would be displayed.
Great, fantastic. Okay.
I have a question.
Joey B.
Joey B.
Mr. Chair, if I may, Mr. Chief Ink, what would be the violation, misdemeanor, citation, and fine amounts if indeed an operator is caught without a permit?
Any of those would be misdemeanors. I'll defer to Mr. Satilli for the actual violation, if conviction.
Yes, Councilmember, what's envisioned is that operators that do not have the police permit would be subject to a misdemeanor cite. Operators that do have the permit but are in violation of the operating requirements would be more of an administrative discipline to take on the police permit. And it's similar to what we do with some of the other police permitted businesses.
OPGs and taxis. What would, I know you indicated the rollout, where are we going to start this program first? And then ultimately, it's going to go citywide. Are we looking at Hollywood first? Or?
Yeah, we've talked about Hollywood since that's where the issue really began, and bringing it forward. And quite frankly, in some of the meetings that I've attended, along with Marcel and other staff, the folks in Hollywood have already organized. Some of them are ready to go. They were ready to go a couple of years ago. So we think we can have a real successful rollout there and identify any rollout issues so we can clarify them as we move it forward throughout the city.
And I know you met with Mr. Englander to talk about including the businesses in the process. So does this mean all businesses on a certain block or just businesses in front of the on-street parking designated for change? I just want to make sure all the businesses are included in the process and ensure that it's just not one effective business, because there's multiple businesses on one street. What's the process in place in looping in other businesses on a specific block or location?
Well, if I have a restaurant, for example, and there are 3 or 4 other restaurants on that block, but I'm the only one that wants to have valet service, then I would go out and I would contract with a valet, and then that valet service would come in to get a permit to operate. They would provide us with a contract with T. Fank's Restaurant. We would then validate all that information, so the permit would go to the valet operator for that particular location. If that contract was severed between the restaurant and the operator, it would be incumbent upon the restaurant to notify us that they're no longer their operator. Since that contract is no longer in place, then that operator could not.
How about the neighboring businesses? If they have an impact on the traffic, say like Buscaino's Pizzeria, 2 doors down, if they're going to have an impact, is that?
Those are issues that DOT, I think, would be best to respond to. We've
I
had
think DOT
discussions.
should walk through
Yes.
just real quickly the process when you have a situation like this, or you have, again,
Multiple,
3 separate
Right.
restaurants,
Right.
3 separate valet companies, and there's only so much street parking. So
What if you have one valet and the other 2 don't have valet? Then the other 2 don't apply. It's only if
that's
they
a
have
little easier.
Yeah, it's only if they have the valet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's what you're asking.
But the permit runs with the restaurant, not, they can cancel the contract. So the valet company cannot hold them hostage.
But you don't have to have valet at the restaurant.
No.
It's only if you
Right.
choose to have valet that this
Yes,
applies.
right.
They can also get together and create the economies of
Part of
scale.
the permit process, you're not asking neighboring businesses for approval?
Yes, they do.
They do.
And that's
Yes.
what Dan will talk about.
DOT can explain that. That'll come from DOT to
Mr.
us.
Mitchell, good to see you.
Good morning. Dan Mitchell, Department of Transportation. In the case that on-street curb parking would be used for loading as part of the valet operation, then there would be a companion sign-off process from the Department of Transportation. And we use a standard petition process for any change of parking regulations. So as part of that process, the business owners or property owners on that block, a majority would have to sign off on the change of regulations, and that would include changing metered spaces to loading zones for valet purposes during certain hours. And then wherever those spaces are located, the business owner that fronts those spaces would have to sign off as well. So you can't extend a loading zone across your neighbor's, maybe a liquor store that's got short-term parking and impact their business negatively without their approval. But they might close at 6 p.m. and then there's no impact. So
Very good.
we would take that into consideration. In addition to that, so that's how we would reconcile issues with change of parking regulations. There's also included in the recommendations a change to the time limit and the ability to tow from passenger loading zones, which we don't currently have. So that's a recommended change to the municipal code to allow for that, to help us keep those spaces clear. There would be also included in that is a fee for conversion of those spaces when that's necessary, and then meter revenue recovery as well.
Got it.
So that if the loading is happening during a time that the metered hours are in place, then we would recover that meter revenue. And that's kind of a self-regulation issue as well, so that they're not requesting more than they really need.
Thanks for that clarification.
Well, there's still the question, if you've got 3 restaurants and only one wants to have valet, what are the other 2? Can they just continue doing the way they're doing?
Yes.
This is an optional program for them.
It's an optional program, so the valet company would apply for their permit. If they were going to use curb parking, then it would come to DOT. Those spaces would be identified, the business owners would sign off on that block, but metered parking would remain in the other spaces, so they wouldn't have to use that
Because
valet
some
parking.
restaurant may have a large parking lot in back, and they'll let their customers there, and the other one doesn't have the valet. Okay.
Yeah, this is not any kind of requirement for restaurants to have valet or to reduce their valet or anything like that.
Okay.
So we've got 4 speaker cards on this as well that I'd like to bring up. And I do appreciate
Thank you.
all the work and effort in answering all these questions.
And your enforcement, Mr. Englander.
Yes. The first is Joseph. Well, question for Mr. T. Fank, though, is you'd mentioned Mr. T. Fink's restaurant. So the question is,
That's
I
just
do have a
mixed
question
in.
on that. You know, you put out a red flag up there, and Mr. Buscaino mentioned the Buscaino Pizzeria. So we know that's Italian. So is your restaurant going to be Italian? Is it going to be Jewish or Lebanese?
Armenian.
Armenian.
It's actually Tefangian, so.
He's the neutral guy.
All right.
Very good.
All right. Joseph with the Hollywood Properties Association, Mariani, followed by Donald Novak, Venice Chamber, followed by Linda Lux.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Chairman, good morning.
And the others, if you want to have a seat at the table as well, you can come on up, that I've called already.
Thank you for your time. I'm here on behalf of Kerry Morrison and the Hollywood Property Owners Alliance, which represents 2 business improvement districts in Hollywood. And this item is of high importance to our organization, and Kerry would have been here herself, but she's at a LASA meeting this morning. As it currently stands, as you know, Hollywood is one of the most active and populated areas in the city of Los Angeles. Anyone who has visited on a busy night knows that the excitement can quickly turn into frustration as droves of cars flow into our streets. Our organization has been a supporter of this item from the beginning because we've seen the chaos that has ensued on typical weekend busy nights. From rogue valets setting up shop and parking cars illegally, as Commissioner T-Fank mentioned, to droves of cars, to people parking on private parking lots without permission, without any regulation in place. It's been very frustrating for our businesses and property owners alike. Originally, we had seen this problem just on Cahuenga, but now we're noticing it in other areas such as Las Palmas. And we believe this ordinance will give the city the ability to not only regulate this behavior, but control it in a way that is supportive of our businesses and safe to both pedestrians and vehicles alike. Again, we fully support this motion and appreciate your consideration of it.
Great, thank you for coming here this morning. Good morning.
My turn?
Yes.
Okay, hi, my name's Linda Lux. I'm the president of the Venice Neighborhood Council, and we're happy that you are considering an ordinance like this, but we really would like you to open the discussion to communities like Venice around the city. Hollywood absolutely needs it, but Venice has major parking problems. My colleague here, Don Novak, will talk about it. He's been leading some creative solutions to some of our problems. So my question is, or my request is to please open the discussion up citywide. Consider other creative solutions than the ones you're hearing about today before you make the decision, and include the neighborhood councils in any decision-making process, because we're the ones, the stakeholders in the neighborhood councils are the ones often affected with cars parking on our residential streets that are adjacent to business areas. So that's my request, to open it up for further discussion.
Great, thank you.
My name is Don Novak. I own a restaurant called Hal's Bar and Grill in Venice and another one called Casa Linda, both on Abbot Kinney. We've been there 25 years. And in the last 3 or 4 years, and I'm part of the Chamber of Commerce, so I'm representing them here. We instituted a valet service that if you go to one end of the block and go to a restaurant called, let's say, Lemonade, you could leave your car there, walk down the street, and pick your car up at another restaurant, Wabi-Sabi. We have one valet that we've coordinated with basically 6 restaurants, 6 different locations, and they've paid for off-street parking. And it's still a bit of a pilot program, but it seems like it's starting to work. You could shop in one store, go to one restaurant and have a drink, and go to another restaurant and have dinner, and have the same valet take your car and pick it up at the next place. So it's taken us about 3 years, but we put these little signs in the retail stores so that they can know that they can go from one place to another and get their car at the other end of the street. We also have worked with the police locally, and we have a program on called Lock It, Hide It, and Keep It. We got the valets to pay to print these. We gave a stack of them to the police, and the valets hand them out. And we try to encourage the valets to keep their eyes open all the time for crime prevention. Remind people who leave things in the back seat of their car to lock their car. And it was, I think my 2 minutes are up.
Yeah.
Okay,
If
so
you have a statement you want to just finish.
we definitely need more parking, and we need some help organizing this stuff, and eventually we'd like to have it go the length of the street on Abbott Kinney.
Terrific, thank you. And let me just address some of the comments that have been made thus far. First of all, I applaud your efforts. It's fantastic. That's exactly what we should be doing, and this will actually complement that. This will allow that to continue. More importantly, what we found when we were out there, and Mr. Zine and I, our deep undercover investigative work, found that COVAD operations, found some of these valet companies, these fly-by nights, were doing the same thing but not working with the businesses. In fact, they would set up a sandwich board with the names of the companies and the restaurants and their logos, put them on the street, and you thought that those companies were contracted with all those restaurants. You thought that they did what you've done, but they didn't, and nobody even knew who they were. And they would just come in at night and throw out their sandwich board on the street, and it said parking for all these restaurants. So it's exactly what you did, but sneakily, it was done without any consent with the restaurants and the shopkeepers there. They didn't know who these people were. There's no way to stop them, but this will allow for you to continue doing what you're doing exactly. So really, truly appreciate that. That's the kind of out-of-box thinking. What's fascinating is as Mr. T-Fink and CD13 has really done a tremendous job, and they did reach out to a lot of people in different communities, not just Hollywood, quite frankly, and identified the problems. They created solutions and ideas and concepts for all of this. The other thing that I'm going to ask is that, and one of my recommendations is that 1 year from now, once this has been implemented, that we actually come back and give an update on how things are going, what changes need to be made, what other issues have been identified. And so we don't just pass an ordinance here today and forget about it, and we've created additional problems. So I absolutely agree. We've got to keep a focus on this and make sure that there's some feedback from the community once it's implemented. Don't just throw it out there and forget about it. So absolutely, great points. And then our last speaker we've got is Jay Krimus, if you could, please. Thank you for coming here this morning as well.
Hi. My name is Jay Krimus, and I own a restaurant in Hollywood on Coenga. I just want to speak to you in favor of this proposal. And
you got to plug the name of the restaurant.
Oh, St. Felix.
All right.
Coenga and Salmon. Yeah, it's been an issue, valet parking for years with the rogue operators and dinged cars and missing cars, and the valet operators getting in fistfights literally with each other, like, this is my turf, no, this is my turf. And just the threat of this ordinance coming to fruition has kind of snapped these guys into shape. And with it actually happening, it's going to help immensely. As parking's already an issue in Hollywood. And the last thing people want is to worry about valet also. So I just want to speak in favor of this ordinance.
And then they come back and want to sue you because they went to your restaurant and something happened to their car.
We get phone calls all the time. Not as much as we used to. Because people are like, oh, my car's dinged or my car's missing. Who do I call? And we don't know.
Yeah.
And just like you said, Ms. Angerhana, there's people just hang a shingle or a sandwich board outside, and we don't know who these operators are.
Right.
So.
Well, I appreciate you coming here this morning, particularly the restaurant owners that are coming here early in the morning, because if you own or operate a restaurant, you're up at 5 a.m.
I'm exhausted.
Preparing and everything, and then, I mean, that's a crazy business. So for you to come down here, hopefully you didn't have to valet this morning down here at City Hall, and we appreciate. It'll be the recommendation from this committee then that based on, yes, a couple other amendments. It'll be the recommendation of this committee that we hear the recommendations first.
Okay. The amendments to the recommendations would be under item 1. We would add deletion of the party events, the social events that we had talked about, instructing the police commission to prepare the rules and procedures to implement the ordinance. And then lastly, under number 2.
Under item 1, you said to remove that. On the
I'm
social, the social you said?
We would remove that
You
from the
would remove
ordinance.
that, okay.
So when the ordinance comes back, it would not cover
Not have
those
that?
events.
Okay.
And then under number 2, we would include the addition of enforcement authority for the street services, street use inspectors.
Okay.
So we would recommend,
social event, we're tackling that separate.
Yes.
yes, that would be removed from the
If you have
draft
a party
ordinance
at your
before you.
house or something, you hire a valet company, because those are so unique
Right.
that this is going to have to be dealt with at a separate time. Excellent. With those recommendations, and one additional recommendation, that this does come back to this committee with an update in 1 year from the time of implementation, not from today, but from the time the ordinance is actually implemented, that it comes back with an update on how things are going, if we need any other changes, for more input, particularly from not just the patrons, but the store owners, and if we have to make any changes at that point. So that'll be the recommendation from this committee.
Just one comment. Well, we've got the folks here, Linda Lux from the Venice area. This ordinance, once enacted, will be a citywide ordinance.
Yes.
Yes, it will.
Okay.
And the ordinance, again, the ordinance will come back again in its new form, be approved 45 days, and then we start implementing. So we still have a little time. I know
Yes.
CD11 has already contacted us to make sure we meet with the community to address their issues.
Fantastic. Absolutely. Terrific. Okay.
Very good.
That'll be the action of this committee.
Universal.
And yes, unanimous. And the next item, Mr. Clerk?
Item number 2, Board of Police Commissioners report relative to the selection of the Raytheon Company to provide a comprehensive digital in-car video system for the police department.
Before we delve into this item, I just wanted to make those aware. First of all, are there any public comment cards on this item? Mr. Clerk? Mr. Clerk, I'm sorry, real quick. Are there any public comment cards on this item?
Comment cards have been received.
Okay, there's no public comment cards, therefore the public comment will go ahead and close for this item, seeing no cards. On this item, I just wanted to let everybody be aware of what we're actually voting on and what we're not voting on today. There is no CAO report that was actually attached in time to the agenda, and therefore it's got a financial obligation. If City Attorney, if you could walk me through what that means and what we actually have before us versus what we don't have before us, and what the action needs to be from this committee?
Certainly. This morning, you have on the agenda the Board of Police Commissioners report only. The CAO report was submitted, was not on the agenda. It's my understanding it was just submitted this morning, or at least we got a copy of it. It would be appropriate, I believe, to discuss the CAO report because it is related to the Police Commission report, and because in large part it is a review of that Police Commission report. However, because it is not on the agenda, it would not be appropriate to take action on the CAO report.
Okay, and the CAO report requires action because it's got a funding mechanism tied to it, is that?
Right. It makes certain recommendations that are fiscal.
Okay. So with that, for clarity, it's my belief from what we've just heard is what we've got before us is actually we can approve or deny or modify any recommendations from the Police Commission to move forward in negotiating the contract. The actual contract itself needs to come back here for a vote anyway, and we can do that when the contract negotiation comes back. We can attach the CAO report at that time to allow that to come forward to the full City Council then with the funding source. So just so we're all on the same page. And then with that, if we can get just a quick overview, Mr. Reyes calls it the Reader's Digest version, is what he usually refers to it. I think he's dating himself when he does it, but he's not here to defend himself, so we won't, he's not on this committee, but I'm going to borrow that language from him. Reader's Digest version, because this has been going on for a long time, and we've already implemented some of it already, so this is just yet another phase. Thanks.
Good morning, Sandy Jo MacArthur of the Police Department. The Reader's Digest version is that we would like the contract to move forward so that the police department can start negotiating with Raytheon, who is the chosen, if it's approved, is the contract that we would like to move forward with. This is a contract for Central Bureau, all of Central Bureau to come up within the next year with in-car video. We just talking generically about the funding issues that you haven't had an opportunity to review the report yet, and we're not voting on that report. I know there are several issues that have come up from public safety regarding funding and concerns about whether or not it will be a MICLA funded project or not. And I would just say that the department, a police department, coordinating with the police commission and the CAO's office, is willing to continue to look at the funding aspect, because we do think there are some other options as we move throughout the year on this. And we can wait and talk about that in a little bit more detail when the CAO's report comes forward. But currently, we have $2.5 million set aside. That in and of itself is about 2 of our divisions in Central Bureau. And as the chief has stated, that we would really like to start moving forward, because one of the things, once we get into the negotiation piece, we can really lock down what the actual final cost will be. As technology improves, many times the cost starts to come down as well. So our hope is that once we get into negotiations with the selected vendor, that we'll be able to actually bring the cost down. Even if it's a little, every little bit's going to help. And in the meantime, I can continue to look through my budget and identify where this year, where we may have savings that we might be able to apply to it that would not require financing all of that piece that is going to be coming forward in the CAO's report. As you know, our budget has been coming in the last 2 years within budget, and we have had savings in the past, and we are hoping to be able to do some of the same things, because once we are in an open contract, we've gone back, as you well know, looking at some of our technology projects, and we've been able to do some cost savings from existing projects. So we do think as a department, we can continue to find funds that would not require all of what right now appears to be requiring financing.
Great. Excellent. Thank you very much for that overview. With that, just a couple small items. One, assuming we approve the moving forward with the negotiation, and some of the statements you had made that prices have perhaps come down because technology, that's what happens. We certainly saw that with the biggest element of this in storage,
Yes.
Which has really come down. And this has been about 8 months, I believe, since the staff recommendation came out.
Yes.
And so that's an eternity. I mean, I think that's there's new iPhones out there in the last 8 months.
It's light years in technology, that's for sure.
And would the department even look at going back to any of the other proposers to see if their technology has been either corrected, or I know there were big price differences. Is that something that will also occur during this negotiating contract, or is that already ship sailed?
Well, that ship has sailed with our choice in vendor, and that's one of the things, whenever a vendor is chosen, that's when we start to get into the nitty-gritty.
So how long will it take for the contract negotiations? When do you anticipate coming back to this committee with the final negotiation?
If it moves forward and gets approved through council, for us to start going forward with it,
Yes.
I would say we would be able to come back within a month or 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it'll be the recommendation of this committee, unless my colleagues have other concerns or questions on it, that we move forward with the contract negotiation with the selected vendor, that we come back here after that's approved from council in, you said about up to 90 days?
In January, we could come back with with an update for y'all.
We'll call it, I want to get it scheduled and move forward rather than just throw out some possibility. So you think it could take 60 days or 90 days?
60 days.
60 days. We'll come back here in 60 days to approve that, depending on what the final outcome was, along with the CAO report then and the funding mechanism, or as Mr. Tiefeng calls it, the funding schemes. Using his verbiage. And with that, one of the things I'd like to see come back here as well, when that comes back, is some of the policy items on in-car video, and to include when we award the contract at that point, and the funding scheme for the purchase and acquisition of these, is how the video is being used by the department. In other words, what's considered public versus private versus investigative on that video. So something in writing that says whether the video could be allowed to be given out as public record, or is it only for investigative purpose? Is it only available under discovery? Something spelled out on the policy. One of the questions that I had heard in the field is that the sound is always recording, or video and sound is always recording 30 seconds back So the second they hit code 3, it starts recording, but it goes back 30 seconds? Is that correct?
It'll go back. You won't hear, when it backs itself up, you do not hear the audio, you only see the video.
I see.
And then it catches up, and then you start hearing the video from the time they activate, the audio from the time they activated it.
I
So
see.
it backs up, and so what you do is you see a silent movie for
Great.
the backup.
So 2 questions on that is, on that, now what happens if, for example, the call goes code 4, they don't arrive at scene, they forget to shut it off, and it continues to record? Is it still recording video and audio
Yes,
for a certain period of time?
until it's shut down.
Until it's shut down. So I'd like to see a policy come back at the same time on is there anything that can be used against any of the officers if something's recorded that's not relevant to the incident? In other words, they could be talking, for example, about a movie they just saw, and it only captures a part of that conversation, and it thinks it's talking about their personal lives, or it thinks it's talking about something to do with the city of Los Angeles or the department, that taken out of context without the full discussion or what led to that, this is just an example, could be used against the officer. And these are things that I've heard from folks that they're worried about, saying, so if it's not relative to the incident itself, what's the department's policy on using that for disciplinary action if it's not relevant to the incident and it's captured on video or audio? And so I'd like to see something written on that, just to protect those officers. They shouldn't have to defend themselves to suggest that while they're on the job, something could be taken out of context when not the entire conversation might have been captured and it's not relevant to what they were even doing. And so something on those lines to come back as well. And then I think that's really all I had for now. That's all I've got. And so if my colleagues have anything on that as well.
Mr. Chair, we put in a request August 31st to this committee, and if we could include it, and what we're asking for, the status of in-car video program, how many cameras are in operation, extent of the maintenance and repairs, comparison of complaints generated by the public before and after the camera's been installed, information on the benefits to the department and the public from having the capability to ensure video images of police stops. So one of the issues we're saying is that if we can save money and not do all these complaints and all the cost involved, some of that money could be diverted to hopefully enhance the program in Central Bureau and other bureaus of the city.
We will put that in writing. I can tell you, as of 3 weeks ago, we looked at the number of complaints that were taken that were impacted by in-car video. There were 144 citizen complaints that were taken, and out of those, 14 were sustained. So we have, that's a little less than 10%. So we were actually able, without going into a full-blown IA investigation, which requires hundreds of man-hours, as you well know.
Right.
We were able to adjudicate those complaints immediately, and that's almost 91%.
So that's a tremendous
So that's
savings
a huge savings.
and a relief for the officers who've been charged with something,
Yes.
or could have been charged with something.
Yes, and the complaints, some of the things that Councilmember Englander's talking about that I'll give you some anecdotal information as well, are when our officers are accused of saying certain things.
Right.
We can immediately go to the in-car video and disprove that complaint. So there has been some really huge benefits in terms of cost savings on the investigative side, but I will put that in a written report.
And then the other question in South Bureau, who did the project in South Bureau?
I'm sorry?
Who did the project? Who did the in-car video? Was it Raytheon or another company?
It was Motorola.
Oban.
Oh, Ben. Okay.
IBM, I'm sorry, I apologize.
IBM, okay.
IBM.
So now you have...
IBM, but it was...
You have IBM in South Bureau,
Yeah.
and now we're going to do Raytheon in Central Bureau, and then you got Western Valley. How are they going to connect, or are we going to end up having a Harley-Davidson engine with a Kawasaki
No, and
transmission?
they will connect, and I brought Dan up because he can talk about the technical side without making me look silly. So,
Thank you, Sergeant Dan Gomez. Yeah, the systems are the same in terms of how they operate. So the vehicles in South Bureau, if we move forward with Central Bureau, they'll be interchangeable. The backbone is the same, so it'll just be more updated. You'll have a nicer DVD player than the other DVD player that you have in South Bureau, but they'll be the same. They'll be able to operate. To the end users, it'll be almost seamless.
So there won't be any interoperability?
No, there'll be no issues between the two.
Okay, good, thank you.
Two other things, I'm sorry, to come back to as well in the written report when this comes back for final approval was one, to revisit the idea of a storage policy based on the calls and incidents. We've discussed this in the past as well. So an example, how long would we keep something for training? How long would we keep something for Code 3 or Code 4? How long would we keep something for any type of use of force or domestic? So developing, that's general, I'm just throwing out concepts, but
Yes.
I know that this is something that nationally, the National Police Officers Association and others are actually starting to adopt these policies rather than just keep everything for 5 years or keep certain incidents for a definite period of time. While the programming up front could be some additional dollars long-term, could be some significant savings once this goes citywide. And so I'd like just to report back on that. And then the last thing is if a black and white is if the system goes down and a black and white is then considered bad order equipment. It goes beyond.
If one camera in a car goes down?
If one camera or a system goes down, we need a policy on what the officers are to do. So right now what I've heard is the division we've got running, if the camera's not operative, that black and white's not operative at all. And they have to take another black and white until that's repaired. It shuts the car down. And with our aging fleet and these issues of, oftentimes we hear things of there's not even enough black and whites available, or what happens in a major incident when we're rolling out on a citywide tactical alert, and all of a sudden they get in a black and white and the camera's not operative. Does that shut it down? So we need a policy on what happens if the camera is not functioning, because we've heard certain things of sometimes 1/3 every 3 cars they get in, or every 4th car they get in, it's down. And so they've got to go get another black and white because the captain has made it a policy, but there isn't a city policy yet. So if we can get a policy on when they cannot operate a black and white if the camera system's down, I would assume there are, and when there's exemptions to that, and if we can bring that back as well.
Yes, one of the issues with that, which we're getting ready as we're moving into a second bureau, as you know, we were very limiting on what was actually in the manual because we knew this was new and we needed to work through some of these things.
Yes.
So we do have South Bureau directives. They come from the South Bureau, not from the individual captains.
Okay.
So just to let you know that we will be looking at all of this as we're now becoming more global in the
Yes.
city versus just in one bureau.
And we've got to look at the fleet rotation as well, because now it plays into fleet rotation. If we're rotating fleet
We are
amongst
looking at
different
that as
bureaus,
well.
and only some bureaus are done, or some divisions are done, it makes rotation of the fleet a little more difficult until everything's rolled out.
Yes, that is accurate, and I can give you an update on the fleet rotation, because the fleet rotation is generally happening now within each bureau rather than outside the bureau, but that was one of the reasons we wanted to make sure as we moved forward that the interoperability was there, so that we can, as we rotate, as we get larger and expand hopefully throughout the whole city, that we don't have the problem with IBM versus Raytheon.
So we're doing more fleet, this is on a whole different subject here, but if we're doing more fleet rotation within bureaus, it was always my understanding that, and that brings up a whole nother
Which we
level
can
of
talk
questioning.
about it
Yeah, we
another-
can talk about
yeah.
another time. But let's make a point to do that, because, for example, Valley Bureau, there's so many more miles, so they're putting a lot more miles on cars in the Valley than they are on other places. So if we're going to get into that situation, at some point, we'll have to do some type of actuarial study and figure out.
If you would like, I could do specific, maybe in 90 days, and come back specifically on motor transport, because I have an incredibly great captain, civilian captain over
Let's
there.
do this. Let's meet. We don't need to schedule it for a public
Okay.
meeting at this point, but let's meet offline
That would be great.
on that, unless my colleagues are more interested on the fleet rotation.
Because it is huge in terms of where we're going with budget and
But
things.
that would
be great.
it is huge, and particularly as we're talking about not financing black and whites and getting out of financing equipment and paying cash and trying to save civilian layoffs so we don't get into situations later on. All right, with that, if we can come back with some of those items, and then Mr. Buscaino, you have anything? Okay, Mr. Zines got a couple.
Just on Valley Bureau and West Bureau, what's the timeline for those bureaus?
Well, we would, if we could move forward with it, depending on, of course, budget, we'd like to finish Central Bureau next year, and then within the following 2 years, have both of those other bureaus up. It takes about 9 months once we get a contract negotiated.
But then there'll be other RFPs out for the other two bureaus?
Yes, we'd have to. Oh,
So in other words...
Actually, this one included it. No, this one included that. This is a phased approach. I apologize.
Okay, so this will be the phased approach for the entire city. So we'll have, Raytheon has 3 bureaus, and then there's 1 bureau that's on another contract, and everything's going to work after that.
Yes, we believe it will, and we can report all of
And
that.
the only thing that will continue to come back to us, and it'll either come back to this committee and/or both, Budget and Finance, will be the financial implementation of the different bureaus as money is available. But the contract negotiation will be for all the bureaus at this point, and then coming back to approve just the financing portion of one.
Yes,
So
because
that's
we want to move forward with Central Bureau first, but we can report back on all of that as we start to be able to negotiate.
And then with the reduction of complaints, the reduction of personnel assigned to internal affairs, be more money to put cameras in the cars.
Well, there's a
like that
potential
logic?
possibility. They're very happy at Internal Affairs that they've been able to already in this short period of time do exonerate those complaints, because that, as you well know, it is actually big.
Yeah. Okay, good.
The report backs on these, by the way, on the policy items that we went over, those 5 or 6 policy items. I would ask that they come back in draft form for discussion, if we could. And do you think those would be available at the same time in the 60-day time frame to come back together?
Yes, you know what, you could have just said that. I apologize, I got distracted.
Okay.
If we're going to do the negotiations for 3 bureaus, I was just informed, which is why I always have my smart tech guys next to me, 90 days is required for all 3 bureau negotiations.
Okay, we'll bring it back in 90 days then instead. And is it reasonable to ask that those policies come back in draft form for discussion to this committee when they come back in
I would ask
period of time?
Commissioner, our commission representative on that, because they're actually our policy setters. So I would ask you to come up and help with that.
Richard T. Fank, Executive Director of the Board of Police Commissioners. What we would envision is the questions that you've asked, Councilman, would come to the Board of Police Commissioners in a report that would come to you all, which would outline and respond to the questions that you have, give the Police Commission any opportunity to identify concerns that they may have in areas that the department has attempted to develop a policy, since they would establish and approve the policies established by the LAPD.
Right, that would be the process.
Okay,
What I'm asking,
exactly.
though, is if they can come back in draft form as well. They can go through the police commission first. I support that. And with that, we'll follow that scheme then. And then on that, if we could, bring that back then, if that's 90 days, let's bring the policies back in 60 days. So I don't want to hold this up.
Okay.
And I don't want, if they come back here in 90 days altogether and there's still questions on some policy items, I don't want to hold up the contracts and the funding mechanisms, and we'll have the CAO report, and at that point, we'll have the negotiations finalized. That way, we can have the policy items finalized at the same time.
Okay.
So if we can have the policy items come back separately in 60 days.
Yes.
So that way, they have the opportunity to be drafted, vetted, gone to the police commission, and then come back here. And then at that point, at a minimum, we can bring them all back at the same time 30 days later. So in other words, 60 days for the policy items, 90 days for the final negotiation and financial scheme. And then all of those would come back together.
Okay.
Okay, that'll be the action of this committee. That adjourns Public Safety Special Committee.